One morning, the Ukrainian brigade lost all of its video feeds from reconnaissance drones and communication between units on the front line. These capabilities were provided by Elon Musk's Starlink satellites. The loss of communication occurred suddenly, but immediately after this incident, Russian units maneuvered and quickly captured the town of Vovchansk in eastern Ukraine. What happened? This is not the first trouble with Starlink. Shortly after that, Elon Musk's company suddenly lost up to 40 Starlinks. A satellite tracking specialist from the Netherlands, Dr. Marco Langbroek, accidentally recorded this disaster. It is believed that the devices failed due to powerful electromagnetic radiation of natural origin. But some experts do not rule out that Russia is using technologies that disrupt the work of Starlink. This is a serious challenge to U.S. security. The fact is that Starlink satellite communication terminals are used not only by the Ukrainian military, but also by the American Army. For example, the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Army's 25th Infantry Division, based in Hawaii, recently conducted an exercise in which Elon Musk's satellites played a central role. They broadcast video streams from Skydio, Parrot, and Teal drones, as well as from K-1000 drones with a range of 1,000 miles and a maximum altitude of 20,000 feet. Can the Russian military now blind American units with a single click? The first way to destroy satellites in orbit is relatively simple, with surface-to-air missiles. For such a mission, Russia has an advanced A-235 Nudol missile defense system, which is capable of destroying ballistic missiles and satellites. Proof of this is the fact that in November 2021, the Nudol complex shot down a non-operational Russian satellite. This is above the orbit of the International Space Station, ISS, and above the orbit of most Starlink satellites. In addition to Nudol, Russia is armed with an advanced mobile S-500 Prometheus system. This system was created primarily to destroy hypersonic missiles and 5th-generation aircraft. But the technical characteristics of the S-500 indicate the ability to shoot down satellites in low orbit as well. Anti-satellite missiles can be very effective, but the combat capability of any modern armed forces depends on the satellite constellation. One day without satellites would cost the U.S. economy $1.5 billion. This is in peacetime. Builders and farmers, civil aviation, transport, shipping. However, it is impossible to calculate the damage because we're talking about the security of the United States. American satellites are responsible for early warning of a missile attack. There is a threat that the entire GPS satellite network could be disabled with a single click. This will be a prelude to war, says Todd Humphreys, a satellite communications systems engineer at the University of Texas at Austin. The consequences are difficult to predict because not a single smart bomb or high-precision missile will reach the target without satellite adjustment. No U.S. destroyer or nuclear submarine will enter a strike position without a satellite signal. No modern fighter or bomber will be able to carry out a mission without space reconnaissance. However, the launch of an anti-satellite missile is easy to record. Therefore, the Russians have prepared a surprise for the United States. These are killer satellites that act covertly. Recently, Russia launched such anti-satellite weapons into Earth orbit. This was stated by the U.S. representative to the UN, Robert Wood. We're talking about 2 different satellites as possible threats to national security. The first is the Cosmos 2553 satellite, which the U.S. says demonstrates technologies typical of nuclear weapons. This satellite is at an unusually high point in low Earth orbit. The Russian satellite Cosmos 2553 was at the very top of Earth orbit, that is, at an altitude of 1,300 miles. In fact, this is an empty highway. In addition to the Russian satellite, no more than 10 American satellites live here, which have not been working for a long time. What is Cosmos 2553 doing surrounded by dead American satellites? Of course, the Russian side does not disclose the true mission of Cosmos 2553. The official press release of the Russian Ministry of Defense says that the Cosmos 2553 spacecraft is equipped with onboard instruments and systems for testing them in conditions of exposure to radiation and heavy charged particles. It is noteworthy that the Cosmos 2553 satellite has a name, Neutron, derived from the Latin word neuter, which means neither one nor the other. There are several more facts that make us doubt the official version of the mission of the Cosmos 2553 satellite. The phrase testing instruments under the influence of radiation is a routine phrase of the Russian Ministry of Defense, which is repeated every time the Russian side seeks to hide its actions in orbit. The mass of the equipment for studying the effects of radiation and heavy charged particles does not exceed 10 pounds, but the mass of the Russian satellite can exceed 3,000 pounds. Therefore, a natural question arises. Why launch a heavy satellite with light equipment on board? Another important nuance. The launch of Cosmos 2553 was prepared for 9 years because it was necessary to adapt the Soyuz 2.1A launch vehicle. Why did the Russians build a non-standard satellite platform when they could use existing platforms? Cosmos 2553 is in a rare orbit for Russian satellites of 1,300 miles, with a rare angle of inclination of 67 degrees. Not a single Russian satellite has such parameters. The creation of the Cosmos 2553 satellite was led by the most secret scientist of the USSR and Russia, general designer of NPO Mashinostroyenia Gerbert Efremov, a master of asymmetric threat. It was he who created Russian hypersonic missiles and Russia's main nuclear missile, the Avangard. The White House claims that U.S. intelligence has evidence that Cosmos 2553 is, in fact, not an ordinary satellite, but the latest anti-satellite weapon. But how can it work? In short, the Cosmos 2553 satellite is probably the switch of all satellites. It is based on a nuclear explosion, because only a few pounds of uranium are needed for a powerful explosion. For example, the American W-38 warhead has a mass of about 3,000 pounds, but the power of its explosion is an inconceivable 3.8 megatons. This is what happens after a nuclear warhead detonates in space. There is no atmosphere in space, so no blast wave is formed. But an electromagnetic wave can be an excellent switch for any electrical devices on rockets and satellites. The case of the fall of 40 Elon Musk satellites confirms this. This effect has also been confirmed by tests. Yes, many years ago, the United States was the first to do this. The USSR then repeated. On August 27, 1958, about 1,120 miles southwest of Cape Town, from an area south of the Falkland Islands, the USS Norton Sound launched a Lockheed X-17 missile with a 1.5 kiloton W-25 nuclear warhead. The explosion occurred at an altitude of 105 miles above the Earth's surface. Then the experiment was repeated at an altitude of 185 and 500 miles. The test participants saw an unusually beautiful sight. Red and purple flashes with vanes and whirlwinds, like fireworks. This is not at all the usual nuclear mushroom. It was something that resembled a quiet aurora. But in 1962, the United States conducted a test with a more powerful charge. As part of the Starfish Prime project, a 1.4 megaton warhead was blown up at an altitude of 250 miles. It was a monstrous explosion, exceeding all other cosmic explosions, both past and future. The explosion occurred in complete silence. There were no sounds, shaking, or rumbling. But the flash from the explosion was seen even at a distance of 3,700 miles. After the explosion in Hawaii, all electrical appliances were turned off. Auroras were visible over almost the entire territory of the Pacific Ocean for several more days. Radiation belts were recorded for another 5 years. But most importantly, the explosion caused the shutdown of instruments, not only on Earth, but also in space. After a 1.4 megaton nuclear explosion, 33% of all satellites in orbit failed. Explorer 14, Track, Transit B, Ariel 1, and even the Soviet satellite Cosmos 5. After this test, the USSR and the United States signed a moratorium on nuclear explosions in space, but the world is now at a stage where treaties are easily violated, so the Russian satellite Cosmos 2553 may well have a few pounds of uranium on board to set off a nuclear explosion with a capacity of 2 to 3 megatons and disable all satellites. At the same time, the damage to Russia will be minimal. The fact is, there are about 5,200 American satellites in Earth orbit and only about 200 Russian satellites. Putin seems ready to part with his 200 satellites in order to deprive the United States of an overwhelming advantage in space. This is an asymmetric threat. After such an attack, the United States will have to spend many months to restore its satellite constellation. What will happen during these months is unknown. But it is known that an even more asymmetric threat is the detonation of a nuclear warhead in orbit over the territory of the United States. With a complete fission of 4.5 pounds of uranium, energy equal to 20 kilotons is released. The Russians can set off a 2 to 3 megaton explosion in orbit over the United States to throw the world back 200 years to an era when the word electricity meant lightning in the night sky. At the same time, there will be no casualties or destruction. Absolutely all electrical equipment will simply fail. Car and ship engines will never start again. Computers, refrigerators, and microwave ovens will become unnecessary garbage. Instead of the internet and mobile communications, you'll have to use the postal service as in the 18th century or carrier pigeons. But there's also a less radical way to destroy satellites unnoticed. Russia has another strange moon, Cosmos 2576. It is now in an orbit that actually allows it to pursue a secret American spy satellite of the Keyhole 11 series. Every few days, Cosmos 2576 and Keyhole 11 come quite close to each other. Of course, this makes the US military nervous, because firstly, the satellites can accidentally collide, and then both satellites will die. And secondly, a Russian satellite can attack the American Keyhole 11 and remain unharmed. How? The fact is that the Russian military has long dreamed of some kind of cannon on board a spacecraft. In the USSR, the concept of an interceptor satellite was chosen as an anti-satellite weapon. In 1979, after many years of testing, this anti-space defense system was put on combat duty. In addition, Russia has a 14.5mm Noodleman Richter automatic cannon with a rate of fire of 5,000 rounds per minute, which is capable of firing in space. However, the destruction of satellites by kinetic strikes can turn the Earth's orbit into an impassable stream of debris, rushing at speeds of 50 to 80 miles per hour. At this speed, even a small fragment can penetrate the skin of a spacecraft. Therefore, space flights will have to be forgotten for several decades. It is believed that only 3 countries in the world have real means of anti-satellite defense: Russia, the United States, and China. India also has some of these capabilities. Therefore, Russia is still trying to counteract the Starlink system with electronic warfare. It is known that they tried to jam the terminals with the help of electronic warfare systems Krasukha. So far, Russia is increasing the number of suspicious satellites in orbit. How events will develop further is unknown.